Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. And I love it because Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources that were once reserved for big businesses. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. I don't talk about it a ton, but I have a fishing company. 5 years ago this month, my best friend Aaron and I started a bass fishing weight company called Woo Tungsten, because woo is the sound you make when you catch a giant bass. So we sell tungsten weights for bass fishing, and Shopify has made it so incredibly easy. They have all the tools and the resources that we need. No matter how big or small your business is, they just make it so effortless. And like mine, Shopify powers over 1.7 million businesses from first sale to full scale. And you can reach customers online and across social networks with their ever-growing suite of channel integrations and apps, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and more. And you can gain insights as you grow with detailed reporting of conversion rates, profit margins, and beyond, which is something we use a ton. More than just a store, Shopify grows with you. Go to shopify.com/Blue Wire, all lowercase, for a free 14-day trial and get access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business today with Shopify. Go to shopify.com/Blue Wire right now. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Shopify.com/Blue Wire.
Blue Wire.
First pick in the 1991 NBA draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Larry Johnson from University.
I'm not supposed to be here, man. A lot of people from where I'm from, don't make it.
Charlotte, we're back.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us again for another Buzz Beat. This is Richie, and I'll be joined by Spencer and Brian this Saturday morning here on Twitter Spaces. One reminder, if you visit buzzbeat.substack.com, you will find written pieces there. Most of them are free. I'm 99% sure my next piece will be about free agency. Also on Substack, there's a way to support us by signing up for BuzzBeat Plus, which gets you ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and exclusive episodes. We've had a couple of those so far. So definitely check that out. I'll put a note in the description of this episode. So a couple of weeks ago, guys, we were actually reacting to the hiring of Kenny Atkinson. He's no longer. We now have Steve Clifford back in Charlotte. It was reported yesterday that the Hornets were bringing him back. The contract is pretty noteworthy. It's 3 years, $4 million per year, and that third year is a team option. Clifford did spend 5 years here in Charlotte, finished with 2 playoff appearances and a record of 196 wins, 214 losses. So, Spencer, I'm going to throw it to you first, but just kind of my initial reaction here is all over the place because, one, I think a lot of people were thinking that D'Antoni was going to be the hire because he was the other finalist, but something must have fallen through there in some kind of fashion because Clifford's name never even circulated until, the last couple of days. I think with the leverage that D'Antoni had, the nature of MJ, this contract that Clifford just received, I wonder if money was a bit of a kicker there. And then I know we're going to get into this, but I think there's just so many different things in terms of philosophies and demeanor between Clifford and JB. So they went from Clifford to JB, now back to Clifford, and there's going to be a little bit of a different philosophy, accountability on the defensive end of the court. This definitely feels like an MJ move, Spencer, and one that is focused more so on the immediate future.
Yeah. It feels like an MJ move. I think they've sounds like kept open communication lines. It sounds like MJ, really has a lot of respect for Steve Clifford. I'd consider this one of MJ's better decisions that he's made recently. I didn't know how to feel about this yesterday. Richie and BG. It just kind of came out of nowhere, and it obviously developed very quickly. But I slept on it, and I'm excited. I gotta say,
wow.
Like I love Steve Clifford. I've always loved Steve Clifford. Respected him a lot. All the obvious things make you nervous. This is a young team. This is a rigid coach who has a rigid voice and very clear-cut expectations. Not a lot of gray area. I tend to think that's what most of the young guys on this roster need. And then, the other concern is obviously offensive style. Very creative, open-ended, kind of unpredictable style of exciting play. LaMelo and Bridges and others bring to this. Steve Clifford, not a coach that has cultivated that kind of style in the past, I would say. So how is that going to mesh? We'll have to wait and see. But I think really to tie a bow on it, in terms of having a young team with a lot of talent and a lot of potential, they need very clear-cut ground rules on what the expectations are, what the scheme is, what they got to bring mentally to the gym every single day. Just the basics. I think this team's got to get better at the basics, and we can go as deep or not into that as you guys want today. But I think Clifford's going to bring that. Like, this could end badly in a year because LaMelo could just be like, I'm just not playing for this guy. Like, that's totally on the table. And that's the risks here.
But it sounds like the locker room, under JB was kind of heading that direction anyway.
Yeah, but I think that answers a lot of questions for Charlotte in the long run. Like, I want LaMelo to be here as long, for his whole career, just like everybody else. But like, he also has to act, play, lead a certain way. And I think Clifford is the guy to start answering some of those questions and hopefully pulling those things out of these young guys. So, is it the perfect fit? Maybe not. Did this all play out in the way that we wanted to? Of course not. We all wanted Kenny Atkinson to be here. That was, the first choice. Then it was D'Antoni, and all of a sudden we have Steve Clifford. Like, the process to get here was very choppy. That's obvious. But I think that the end product, Steve Clifford, what this young roster needs, I don't think this is a bad thing. So, BG.
I think I'm still trying to kind of like wrap my head around it. And I think maybe that's also just pushing me towards some overthinking. Like, this move just kind of is what it is. Like, Spencer, you said there's clearly, they kept open the line of communications. There's trust. MJ clearly likes Steve Clifford. And I think Cliff is someone that you can bring him in. We've seen it now in both Charlotte and Orlando. He can organize the defense, raise the overall floor of that team, nail down some key obvious bits of kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of overarching strategy, avoid fouls, avoid turnovers, limit opponent transition possessions. And, for instance, I went back and pulled up some numbers last night, going back to the 18-19 season. Orlando's defense ranked number 9 in the NBA in percentage of opponent possessions that would qualify as transition. And they ranked 2nd in the league in defensive efficiency in transition, those numbers per cleaning the glass. In the following year, they were number 6 in the NBA in percentage of defensive possessions that came in transition, and number 11 in efficiency on those possessions. However, like, some of the concerns, like, Clifford teams are often teams that have a bit of a ceiling, like a bit of a governor on them, both in terms of like their style of play, how creative they're going to be offensively, decent regular season teams, but ones that always turn into fodder in the postseason, for a 1 or a 2 seed team. And like, I think to an extent there's a level of credit to that, because you're probably getting a team to overachieve a little bit and play above its head a little bit and actually crack into the playoffs. But then once it's there, and I think Cliff has shown himself to be a pretty good playoff coach. Like, they got a game off the Raptors in 2019. I thought Charlotte came to play in 2016 against Miami and did a really nice job. They just ran into a 3-point shooting buzzsaw with, Joe Johnson and Luol Deng and even Dwayne Wade in that series.
They ran into playoff Dwayne Wade, random 3-point makes in the series,
And then, purple shirt guy, something Steve Clifford couldn't account for that. As far as the stuff with LaMelo goes, I will be curious to see just like the commitment to turnover avoidance and the balance that's struck between LaMelo's dominating the ball. He's this one-of-a-kind passer, someone who sees the floor in a way that is unique and pretty special. And, I would hope there wouldn't be some sort of, for lack of a better term, some sort of ceiling or cap that's put on LaMelo or other sort of like team-wide creation efforts. Someone like Miles Bridges seems like perfect to like buy into like the Steve Clifford mentality, like the sort of like do whatever it takes, blue collar. Like he'll probably like he could, even if after he gets paid, maybe Miles still brings a different level defensively next season. I don't know. We can maybe get into some of the offensive stuff, but just like I go back to when Clifford was here initially, and this is really where like, I would love to hear from someone that watched more of the Magic the last couple of seasons, both the highs and lows when Clifford was there, because I'd like to sort of know a little bit more about their mix offensively. But just when I think of those teams, and part of it was personnel related, but they were just so reliant on spread pick and roll, 1-5 pick and roll with Kemba. And the fourth quarter offense, the crunch time offense just became so rote, just spread pick and roll. And I just don't want to fall into that loop again with someone like LaMelo, who, we talked about it this past season. Like at times it felt like the offense was a little too heavy on spread pick and roll with LaMelo, and that really their best offense was when they get into their flow and they're showing you multiple guys that can attack off ball screens or ghost screens, and they're whipping it side to side around handoffs and slips. The ball's popping around, and it's not just LaMelo one high and from the top, or LaMelo empty corner, which the empty corner stuff was really good for them this year with LaMelo, but I still think they leaned on it a lot. So that's kind of where I'm at with Cliff. Like I think it's going to take a little bit more time for me at this point. Like I'm just going to reserve rights until I actually see it, because like I think of Steve Clifford as being a pretty good coach, and assuming he's healthy and up for this, because Steve Clifford battled work stress issues when he was in Charlotte, and I believe he had those in Orlando too. So I worry about the health of him in general. So, but assuming he's up for it, I mean, he's definitely like not a bad NBA coach. And it would make sense for him to be in a vacuum. It would make sense for this kind of coach, someone that's taken two different franchises to the playoffs, that's been in the NBA for a long time. It would make sense for someone like that to be brought in. I think, but it's the fact that there was like a prior relationship to this one that just makes you sort of like scratch your head a little bit, I think.
Get on Team Shaq with WinBet. We're playing parlays, boosting odds, and laying the wildest prop bets. Don't miss another game. Download the WinBet sports betting app today.
Sign up today and win $200 in free bets when you place a $50 first-time wager on a straight bet or parlay. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at winbet.com. Must be 21 or older and present in a state where playthrough WinBet is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
Sports fans, come experience the FanDuel Sportsbook at Live Casino and Hotel for all your sports betting action. The ultimate place for any sports enthusiast. Take advantage of our 24/7 kiosks, massive video screens, and watch all the action from the best seat in the house. Make every moment more at the all-new FanDuel Sportsbook at Live Casino and Hotel in Hanover, Maryland. Please play responsibly. Gambling problem? Please call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit mdgamblinghelp.org.
I think in terms of like the spread pick and roll, having to really lean on that almost constantly. I mean, I just think this roster as it's currently constructed versus, Kemba really being your only playmaker. I mean, I know there was hope Nick Batum could bring some of that. We don't need to go back down that road. That did not work out. But, Terry Rozier, Miles Bridges, LaMelo Ball. I mean, there are pieces, there's a myriad of playmaking options on this team. So I think some of that is alleviated just by being the roster being more, equipped in that area where you can be more creative offensively, as Charlotte was under Borrego. I wonder about transition to
yes.
You got to be able to tap into LaMelo Ball being a pretty good rebounder as a guard and a generational hit ahead passer. So, Clifford's teams always lead the league in defensive rebounding rate. I would hope that he's going to explore sending one or two guys running the wings consistently, as we've seen the past few seasons from Charlotte, which obviously leads to being bottom 10 in defensive rebounding rate, but also leads to free points because LaMelo Ball's best full court passer in the game. So, just creativity, how can Clifford stretch his limits in those areas? And then defensively, well, we can talk about the defense later if you guys want. The other question I have, and then Richie kind of jump in here, Kai Jones needs to see the floor at some point. James Bouknight needs to see the floor at some point. We just drafted Mark Williams. JT Thor showed some flashes. Steve Clifford, not a guy. I don't think I'm breaking news here, but not a guy that traditionally likes to play young players. We got some guys that need to see the floor. That are young and developing. So that's the other real big question mark that I have. And when it comes to young players getting time, I'm just going to need to see it first.
Yeah, he's definitely coming into a situation that was much different when he's with the first year with the Bobcats, and he's going to have more talent on his team. He's acquiring a team that is just much different in terms of their makeup. And, those that are familiar with Clifford know a couple things about him. One, in terms of getting on the court, the young guys have to work for it. I know that Malik Monk probably averaged 15 minutes per game his rookie season. And I know that a lot of people were clamoring for him to play a little bit more. He's defensive oriented. He wants to slow the game down. And that is very much a contrast in what he's acquiring. I think I'm very interested to see his pairing and his core beliefs with LaMelo, because if you do want to rebound the ball, which is something that James Borrego's teams never did, you're obviously going to concede getting up the court and leaking up the court. And I think Clifford has got to at least concede a little bit of that. In his 5 seasons with Charlotte, he was first overall in defensive rebounding percentage in 4 of the 5 years. In that 5th year, he was second. So that's great. He can solve that aspect. But pace, he's typically bottom 10. And so there's a contrasting style here between these two coaches. And I think that if you want LaMelo to succeed, you're going to have to give up some of these philosophies of having 5 people rebound, make sure you grab the ball, be very detail oriented. He's going to have to loosen up a little bit. And when he does get in the half court, he is very much a slow it down type of guy. And to Brian's point, spread it out, run pick and roll, pound the rock a little bit. And I think this team is going to have to balance and bridge that gap between JB and Clifford. So Clifford's definitely going to have to give up some things. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. I think there's a very contrasting style between these two coaches, and I wonder how much Clifford will concede in making sure that he accentuates some of the best players. And by doing that, he's going to have to give up some of his old philosophies, I think.
Yeah, I mean, part of the other sort of if I'm talking about kind of I don't know if I would label them concerns or sort of things that I'm interested to see how they play out, but given their relationship to player development, it is something that I suppose I have a little bit of worry for. This is someone that doesn't experiment a lot with lineups, which is something that, maybe, James Borrego took sort of an opposite approach to that, and I know it didn't go great. Does Steve Clifford have a tendency to maybe sort of place guys into boxes and then not really let them kind of sort of see where a more holistic development would take? I think about someone like MKG, who just got placed into being like a wing. And hey, here's when you shoot, here's when you don't shoot. And here's the responsibilities we want for you defensively, where even though you didn't get to see a lot of it, the MKG time under James Borrego, that's, he's already been in the league 6-7 years at this point, but just trying him at different places, using him in more of sort of like a modern role. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what that means for guys like Kai Jones and JT Thor. These sort of like young hybrid front court players that we're just not sure what they're going to be, or really like kind of the best paths for them development wise, So that is something that I will keep an eye on. Let's see. Do you guys want to talk defense at all? Or Spencer, do you have any other thoughts on this sort of thread we're already going on here with Cliff?
Not really. I think we pretty much covered like what the strengths and weaknesses, right. At least we guess. Yeah. I do. Richie, do we have a speaker we want to bring on? Or
yeah, we do have Cam. Cam, go ahead and unmute.
Hey guys, just procedurally, how did we get to Clifford when he wasn't on the radar the first time? And this might be a little bit more seeking inside information we might not have. Was part of it that they wanted to, hopefully keep some of the player development staff? I know that was an issue with Atkinson that we wanted to keep some of the coaching staff. I wonder if Clifford might be more amenable to that. And then the last thing is, I just don't see how, we kind of let Borrego go. There was some rumblings that maybe he had lost the locker room, or like there needed to be a new voice, something like that. I just cannot see how Clifford lasts more than a year with LaMelo Ball and hopefully Miles Bridges listening to this old man scream at them about boxing out. The process it's the same as kind of what was on draft night. It just seems like a mess. And that's the most frustrating piece, because we have like a lot of talent and it's an entertaining team to watch, but the process moving around is not giving me a lot of optimism about how we're going to utilize this talent moving forward. Thanks. Appreciate all you guys did. Really enjoyed the draft coverage on Thursday.
Cam, thanks. I think you're dead on here. We don't need, usually when Michael Jordan makes a decision, you don't really need that much inside info, in my opinion, because the dominoes start falling in the drift. It's pretty clear what happened, and I think you're correct. This team wanted to keep the staff on board, the younger staff, probably because they're locked in at a certain price point and they can count on that in the budget. So penny pitching is 100% part of this. I believe that probably some of the issues with D'Antoni, don't know this, just speculating. He wanted to bring in probably some of his own staff, that he wanted to get paid a little bit more than the Hornets were willing. Just same stuff that Atkinson went through with the team. And then they get to Clifford, who it was probably one of the cheapest options out there. Again, penny pitching. And he agreed to bring this staff or at least part of the staff that's already in Charlotte, to retain them and carry on. So welcome to the Michael Jordan experience as an owner. So everything you said, I 100% totally agree with. And it is frustrating, the process. So I try not to let that skew how I actually feel about Steve Clifford as a coach, which is very, very positive for the most part. So yes, I think that, as I opened up with earlier, I think this is ultimately can be a good thing. And I think there is a chance that these young ears and minds grow to love Steve Clifford. And this can be a good working relationship. I also believe, as you said, this could blow up and end in a year as LaMelo Ball approaches his extension eligible time frame, and now the Hornets have a total shit show on their hands. That's like, again, the domino effect, right? Like it could totally go that way. Ultimately, this is everything that we've talked about, the overarching cloud, everything we've talked about in the last 48 hours. What's today? Say Saturday. Yeah. 48 hours since really the draft and everything we've been through. This all has to do, all of it in some way, ultimately with Michael Jordan's pocketbook. Yeah. So, for an owner, I don't care if Steve Clifford works out or not. Now I'm kind of going off the rails, but I don't really think Charlotte will ever ultimately succeed at their ultimate potential with what the roster provides and maybe even the coaching staff provides, because they have an owner that's never going to spend. And the juxtaposition of that, this owner being allegedly the most competitive person of all time, I'll never get over it. So anyways, I'm off the rails now. Good question. I think it brings up a myriad of topics we can talk about.
It's also just like they can't even get, because and some of it has been bad luck over the years. Some of it has been just missing out on some opportunities, but they can't even like get to the level where it would be like, hey, could we actually get and go into the tax? Like, the team's good. You know what I mean? We could dip into the tax a little bit to bring in, one more player, or bring back this player. And maybe that's the thing that makes Charlotte a 50-win team. You know what I mean? It's like they can't even get to the level where you could look around and say like, hey, one or two more pieces, like, and all of a sudden we could be a top 3 team in the East. It's like they haven't even been able to get to that level. And that's just because like the scope in terms of roster building has been just so narrow. I said this the night of the draft with Lee and Richie. It's a little disappointing when that's that same sort of like narrow approach, this one track approach, is happening while you also have guys like Miles Bridges and LaMelo Ball, or specifically LaMelo, like someone that seems like a tent pole, but beyond that is just unique, is a different player. And that even when you have a talent like that, you're not thinking outside the box as much as maybe is required. Not saying you have to like placate and you've got to like just make LaMelo feel like he's your number one boy every day. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. Just in terms of style, in terms of how dynamic you want to be with development and adding young players around it. It's just, I don't know, man. It's like Cade Cunningham comes in a year later after LaMelo, and it's like, look what Detroit has already done by just being a little bit more patient and a little bit more outside the box, building this thing up around Cade Cunningham. And now they're looking out with a pretty impressive young core. And we'll see where they go from here. Like, the hard work starts now. They've put Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Sadiq Bey, like some very good players around. I know Bey was on the roster beforehand, but I do think in terms of stuff to keep an eye on for Charlotte, and we can maybe use this as a way to talk maybe some other defensive scheme type stuff. I think Clifford coming in, joining the day after Mark Williams is drafted is a little interesting. And in a marriage that I think could work between those two pretty nicely, actually. Like, we've seen Steve Clifford be able to construct defenses that were top 10 in the NBA, that had Al Jefferson at center. I know the game has changed a lot since 2014. Like, we're almost not even talking about the same sport in a lot of ways. But was able to build top defenses, good defenses with Nikola Vucevic as his center. Now, some of those Orlando teams also had just like monster athletes on the wings defensively. Jonathan Isaac, Aaron Gordon, Isaac when he was actually available to play. And, Charlotte doesn't have those types of guys at this point. But, I think we'll see a lot of drop coverage, something that you saw primarily in Orlando with Vooch and with Bamba. And I know the Mo Bamba, Steve Clifford relationship was not one that bore a lot of fruit. But I do think someone, like Mark Williams, that's coming into the league a little bit older, played for Krzyzewski at Duke. Like, I could see like the initial, meeting between those two guys worked pretty well. And Clifford maybe seeing him as someone that you could really build the defense up around. If not this season at the start, then maybe by the end of the season or heading into next year. There were times in Orlando, though, where he would mix things up, bring Vooch up to the level, blitz him on certain stuff. Like, I was pulling up tape from the Charlotte versus Orlando in 2018, 2019. So Borrego's first year, Kemba still on Charlotte. And Vooch was in a drop often, but they also had him come up higher at times. I also pulled up some film from the 2019 playoffs versus Toronto last night. And at times they had Vooch to the level, like going against double drag versus Kawhi. So I think that's like a little interesting. I also pulled up some film from 2018 versus Portland and Dame. This is when Clifford is with Orlando in year one. A lot of Vooch in the deep drop versus Dame. So really trusting that point of attack defender, you know what I mean, to fight over. So I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on, is like, what is Steve Clifford able to coax out of LaMelo, Terry Rozier, those kind of James Bouknight, the guards that are going to be the ones having to snake and fight over the top of a lot of screens. So that is something I'll be interested to see. There were times against Portland in Dame's pull-up shooting where Vooch would be high, like right at the level or just underneath it. But for the most part, mixing in the drop. So I don't know. Like it's something that I will be curious to see. Like in theory, like I like Williams in that kind of defensive role, like primarily drop, but a little bit of scheme versatility. It's just, can you figure out the point of attack defenders that are the ones going to be sort of like setting the edge for you defensively, while Williams, in theory, and after when he's ready, is the one that's closing off the paint and also sort of like leading your defensive rebounding efforts.
Yeah, I truly think, and I know I joked about this in our Slack, but I think the decision to draft Mark Williams was with the thought that Clifford was going to be the head coach. Maybe they already had that in mind. Maybe they had already moved off of D'Antoni, and he wasn't necessarily a serious candidate at that point. So yes, I do think that Mark Williams can fit the scheme of the drop coverage. We talked about that leading up to the Atkinson hire. The things that I do remember about Clifford, in Charlotte as a defensive-minded coach, I'm trying to get my memory correct, but I think I remember a lot of like overhelping, protecting the paint, limiting shots at the rim. You have a big player, massive player like Mark Williams that can take away shots at the rim. I think that's going to play right into, what Clifford wants to do. And moving forward, you've got to wonder when it comes to free agency and just acquisitions, do the Hornets look to make moves that are focused on the defense? Because to your point, Brian, some of our point of attack defenders on this team leave a lot to be desired. Does this mean that Cody Martin becomes a priority? Does this mean that Kelly Oubre is expendable? So these are the things that I'm starting to think of moving forward in terms of how, Clifford wants to shape his roster, especially on the defensive side of the court.
I hadn't even thought of the Kelly Oubre, Steve Clifford dynamic. That's going to be hilarious.
Probably not a match made in heaven.
Probably not. No. I would like to be the first to preemptively say, welcome back to Charlotte, Michael Carter Williams. I don't know. I'm just saying, like,
are you reporting this?
I'm not. I'm speculating wildly.
Julian Stone.
Or knowing Steve Clifford's fondness for MCW, I don't.
Yeah, and to that point, Isaiah Thomas, maybe not coming back.
Yeah, probably not. It would seem that they would go defense to sort of like, find an extra guard here.
Yeah, good points, Richie. The last thing I wanted to say about the defense, and then I want to quickly touch on free agency and maybe how Clifford's presence affects that. I'm really excited about exactly what Brian was talking about with, guards have to work really, really hard in Steve Clifford's defensive scheme because, yes, the center's going to drop, whether that center is Mark Williams or Mason Plumlee or someone else. We'll talk about that in a second. It doesn't matter. We're going to primarily play drop under him. Look, LaMelo Ball is 6'7". He's long. He's elastic. Like, he is more than capable of being a really good defensive guard when it comes to staying on the hip and staying in the jersey of a ball handler coming around his screen. Like, he's one of those defensive players, like a really good defensive wing, where he doesn't need to stay in front of the ball. He doesn't even need to stay hip to hip to the ball handler because of his length, right? So just being committed to staying as attached as possible around those screens, I think he could make huge leaps very, very quickly just with some attention to detail. Rozier, it's a different story. He's limited there. Miles Bridges also can make huge leaps. So there's plenty to be excited about in that fashion, in that scheme. Wanted to touch on that. In terms of free agency, I do wonder. I think if I read Kupchak's comments correctly in the Williams introductory press conference yesterday, it was very much, well, we'll see how much he plays. It's going to take him a while, which was a little like wah, wah, because that means Mason Plumlee, as the roster is currently constructed, is going to play the majority of those minutes. So segueing to just Clifford's presence now, what he needs is a starting center, assuming that's not going to be Mark Williams day one. Does it mean that this team finds a way via trade, getting off salary in order to bring in, say, an Isaiah Hartenstein or I don't know, name your center. Like we could go wild here, but I do wonder if it turns up the volume on how aggressive the Hornets will be in trying to upgrade the veteran center position to ensure that Mason Plumlee is not the starting center day one. I really think that could be in play here. At the right cost, of course. But I wanted to just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and I think we have like 20 second-round picks that we can attach to, right?
That's correct. But MJ's going to sell those for cash at a later date. So I don't know that we could sell those. So, but yeah, I don't know. I'll just kind of throw it to you guys there. I do wonder if like part of the negotiation, Clifford's like, okay, keep your staff on. I'll coach for you at this number. You can have your team option on year 3, but we're going to upgrade this center position this summer. Like, I don't know. I'm just making stuff up here, but I do think in some way his presence could have an influence on the free agency strategy.
No, I agree. Perimeter defense, but also as a big man as well, Spencer. And yeah, it's kind of weird that he brought up those thoughts about Mason Plumlee, about, Mark Williams may or may not see a significant amount of playing time, and that leads you to believe that Mason Plumlee has the starting job locked up. Or who knows? Maybe it could be something like, hey, we're trying to boost Mason Plumlee's value out there, and we really value him because he's not going to badmouth Plumlee. Like that's not what he's going to be doing in that type of press conference. But I don't even think like Plumlee was even asked in that question. He just kind of naturally brought him up. But I think getting off salary to bring in another center outside of the rookie Mark Williams that has a presence on that end of the court is going to be huge because, if Clifford did concede with the staffing and maybe his contract was not exactly ideal for him, maybe he has some kind of say in how he's going to construct the roster on the defensive side of the court. And I think the big man especially needs to be upgraded.
Yeah, and I wonder like who Clifford sees as expendable, right? To build this roster around defensively. Like, is it more of a Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward? Like these guys really aren't going to help me out that much in what I'm trying to do, or is it like I want to go get this defensive wing or this defensive center that's going to make a difference day one? And I don't really know how I'm going to weave James Bouknight or Kai Jones into this lineup. And we use them as what I would consider pretty valuable trade bait to try to go upgrade the roster. So anyways, I just thinking through some of that and who he might or might not prioritize on this roster might really influence what happens here in free agency as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we brought up the name Cody Martin earlier. It's funny because, like, Cody's someone that was drafted a year after Steve Clifford left, but he really does feel like a Cliff-type player in a lot of ways. So I think all of a sudden, after – Bridges is going to be back. I think especially after we saw how they played draft night, shipping out the essentially the 13th pick and that – projected salary slot for a rookie. It's like I was already pretty certain that Bridges would be back, and now I feel sort of like even more emboldened. I mean, we'll see, I guess, how it plays out, but I feel confident in that. And then below that is, what do they want to do with Cody Martin? For people, I think there are other young guys on the roster that, like someone like James Bouknight, that could be looking up and saying like, where do I fit, into the mold here? But for someone like maybe like McDaniels, that's a guy that could look up and say like, wow, now I could really have a chance to sort of to see a bigger role and to really be unlocked as like a defensive wing and someone that can be disruptive at the point of attack and do it with maybe, if Williams comes online at some point this season with the real presence in the paint too. So, just looking at at the wings, again, I think Bridges will be back, and I think the Bridges Clifford fit is nice. I think that's gonna work out. I think McDaniels, there's some potential there too, just because of his buy-in and impact defensively. The same could be said for Cody Martin. It's just, I don't know what the market looks like for him this offseason. It seems like a guy that probably gets the full, could get the full mid-level, would be my thought is how other teams would see him as a guy that's in the prime of his career, can shoot a little bit, winning plays, pretty good defender, et cetera. But maybe not, maybe a little bit below that, but it does sort of feel like he could draw the full mid-level from somebody. So what does that do? If that's the case, what does that do to Charlotte's desire to retain him? So anyways, those are some loose thoughts I have on free agency. Yeah. And yeah.
All right, I do want to wrap with one last speaker request before we get out of here, because we got to get out of here by 9. Matt, your hand was up the longest, so go ahead and ask your question.
Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, first of all, on Clifford, I'm not very enthused on that hire, but he's not a bad coach. But if you're looking for a guy to take you to the next level, I'm very skeptical on that one, and I don't know how to measure. But you were mentioning players, how they were fit into his system. I think possibly PJ Washington could benefit. He's kind of that kind of guy that does all the little things and really shows a lot of effort out there. But I don't know how Clifford would be to playing, a small ball lineup with him at the 5. I think he probably is not a fan of that, but I just want to get your thoughts on that. I hope PJ, I know he's been one that's, been throwing around is most likely going to be traded or whatever eventually, but I would love to see him be here long term.
Yeah, I think McDaniels, I think PJ, I think Cody Martin, obviously he's a free agent. Those guys seem like Clifford guys. And to your point, Matt, on the opposite end, PJ had a lot of run because he was so versatile with the way that he could be played. He could be played at the 4, he could be played at the 5. It's hard for me to imagine him playing at the 5 with under Clifford. But like I said throughout this podcast, Clifford is going to have to concede some things with the way that he coached originally. And you're not going to be able to take out all of his philosophies because, that's who he is. That's what he has become as a coach. And I think Brian mentioned this earlier. Yes, there is a ceiling in which Clifford can bring these teams up with, but I also think that he does raise the floor of the team. Because if you were to look at that 2016 playoff team, there's not a lot of great players on that roster. Kemba Walker, Cody Zeller, we had Batum and stuff like that.
But kindly, yeah. One thing to say on specific to PJ, defensively, I'll be curious to see how that plays out. There are some things that Orlando did offensively with Vooch, and they're not the same player, right? Because Vooch is much bigger. He's got a legit back to the basket game, and he's an excellent pick and pop player. I mean, so is PJ. But some of the stuff, the pick and pops, the elbow action that you saw with Vooch is something that PJ could potentially, assuming he's still on the roster next season, could find a role doing that stuff offensively. So maybe that's sort of a way to unlock PJ a little bit more, which is something that I think we were hoping to see at parts of this season.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us here on Twitter Spaces. This is going to be released as a podcast as well. Hope you guys enjoy your Saturday. For Brian, for Spencer, I'm Richie. Have a good one.
What's up, y'all? I'm David.
And I'm Justice.
And the Don't Trip podcast is now a part of Blue Wire Network. Considering getting back with an ex? Want to know if a pickup line works? Or maybe you're just stuck in the friend zone.
Don't Trip is advice at no price. And we're always going to keep it real.
We engage directly with our listeners with funny segments such as Simpin' or Pimpin', where we rate pickup lines, high questions to answer the unanswerable, or live listener call-ins.
Listen to Don't Trip on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And catch the video versions on YouTube every week.
Don't trip.
We got you.